They called her useless, an embarrassment, a woman who peaked in high school and then spent her prime years as a decorative, quiet wife, only to be discarded for a newer, shinier model. To her ex-husband, Julian Sterling, she was nothing more than a pretty, empty-headed burden he was finally glad to be rid of. He and his new fiancée laughed about her little job at a local gallery, but they never wondered why she was so quiet or why she never asked for a penny in the divorce. They were about to find out at the one event where reputations are made and destroyed. The aroma of burnt espresso and judgment hung heavy in the air. Eliza adjusted the simple, dove-grey sleeve of her blouse, her gaze fixed on a framed lithograph she didn't truly see. She worked at the Seraphine Gallery, a quiet, elegant space in a revitalized downtown district that specialized in contemporary realism. It was a job she had sought for its anonymity. It was, she often thought, the perfect place to be invisible. That anonymity was shattered the moment Beatrice Sterling, her former mother-in-law, swept into the cafe next door where Eliza was grabbing her lunch. Flanking her was Victoria Thorne, the woman who had replaced her. Victoria was all sharp angles, platinum hair, and the blinding glint of a 10-carat diamond that Eliza knew Julian couldn't really afford. Not yet. "Oh, Eliza," Beatrice boomed, her voice dripping with the kind of saccharine pity that stings more than venom. "Fancy seeing you here. Still, working, are we?" Victoria, sipping an iced beverage that looked complicated and expensive, let her eyes drift over Eliza's simple linen trousers and flats. A tiny, perfect smirk played on her lips. "Beatrice, darling, be nice. It's commendable that she's trying to, contribute. After all that time was the decade Eliza had spent as Julian Sterling's wife. A decade of hosting his immaculate dinner parties, of smoothing over his abrasive personality with clients, of managing 2 households while he built his empire. An empire that, she knew, was still more facade than substance. "It's a lovely gallery, Beatrice," Eliza said, her voice even. She had perfected the art of the placid exterior. "You should stop by." Beatrice let out a tinkling, insincere laugh. "Oh, darling, I don't think we have the time. Julian is just so busy. He's on the cusp of something monumental, a deal that will finally put Sterling Innovations on the map in a way that, in a way you could never have understood." "The Vance Holdings partnership," Victoria supplied, unable to stop herself from preening. "You've probably never heard of them. They're dreadfully private. But Julian, he always gets what he wants." Eliza's hand, resting on her tote bag, clenched slightly. Vance Holdings. The name was a phantom limb, an ache she had lived with her entire life. "That's wonderful for him," Eliza said, her voice a perfect neutral monotone. She rose from her small table. "Please excuse me, I have to get back." "Of course, dear," Beatrice said, waving her away. As Eliza turned, she heard Victoria whisper, not quite quietly enough, "God, can you imagine? Going from Julian's world back to that? She looks so used up. It's pathetic. He really did carry her for years. She's utterly useless without him." Eliza walked out of the cafe, her back straight. The word useless echoed in her ears. It was the word Julian had used in their final, brutal argument. "You contribute nothing, Eliza. You have no ambition, no drive. You're a leech, a beautifully useless ornament. I'm done." She had let him believe it. She had, in fact, encouraged him to believe it. She had walked away from their marriage, from the sterile, minimalist penthouse he adored, with nothing but a single suitcase and her maiden name. A name she kept buried, a secret held so close it had nearly suffocated her. She had left one gilded cage, she thought, unlocking the gallery door. But the bars, it seemed, had a way of following her. She just wished they weren't so convinced of her irrelevance. It was, ironically, the one thing that still gave her power. Julian, Beatrice, and Victoria saw her as a ghost, a non-entity. They had no idea that ghosts in their own way held all the cards. They couldn't hurt you, but they could certainly haunt you. And soon, she suspected, her haunting was about to begin. Julian Sterling paced his office, a glass-walled box on the 45th floor that overlooked the city. The office, like his life, was a curated masterpiece of cold, modern design. A single, dramatic orchid sat on a desk of brushed steel. There were no photos, no clutter, just a phone, a sleek monitor, and the hum of his own relentless ambition. "They're stalling, Gregory," Julian snapped, yanking at the knot of his silk tie. "We've sent the proposal 3 times. 3. And all we get back is a form email from some paralegal at Vance Holdings. Do they even know who we are?" Gregory, his partner, and the coding genius behind their tech ran a hand through his already frazzled hair. "They're Vance Holdings, Julian. They're the they. They're a $200 billion private equity hydra. They don't need to know who we are. We need them to know." "And they will," Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, confident growl. He stared at his own reflection in the window. He was handsome in a severe, cut jawline way. He'd willed himself into this success. He'd cut every tie that didn't pull him upward. That included Eliza. "Thank God I cut the dead weight when I did," he mused aloud. Gregory looked up, uncomfortable. "Julian, don't." "No, I'm serious," Julian pressed, turning. "Victoria gets it. She understands the image. She's a partner in this. Eliza. My God. She just wanted to, I don't know, read books and visit museums. She thought ambition was a dirty word. She would have held me back from this, Gregory. She would have said it was too aggressive or not authentic. She was useless." Gregory, who had always liked Eliza, said nothing. He remembered Eliza as the one who brought soup to the office during their first all-night coding session, the one who remembered his kid's birthday. But he also knew Julian's drive was what paid the bills. "This Vance deal," Julian continued, "is everything. Their infrastructure, their global network. They plug into our system, and Sterling Innovations becomes a global standard. It's not about the money, Greg. It's about the legacy." This was a lie, and they both knew it. It was entirely about the money and the status that came with it. "So," Gregory said, "what's the new plan? Because the old plan of sending emails isn't working." Julian smiled, a predator's smile. "The new plan is Victoria. She's a shark. She found an inn. The annual Heart's Hope charity gala. It's the most exclusive philanthropic event of the year. You can't buy a ticket. You have to be invited, or be a major donor." "And we're not," Gregory stated flatly. "No, but Victoria's family foundation bought a table for an obscene amount of money. We're going. And more importantly, we know who else is going." He tapped his monitor. A file opened, showing a blurry, decades-old photograph of a man with severe, piercing eyes. "Arthur Vance," Julian breathed. "The man himself. He's a recluse, hasn't been photographed in public since the 90s, but he's the chief patron of the Heart's Hope Children's Wing. He always attends, even if he stays in his private suite. If I can get 5 minutes, just 5 minutes in a room with him, I can close this. And if you can't?" "I will," Julian said. "Victoria is already planning her assault. She's networking, finding out who his gatekeepers are, what his interests are. She's securing our future, unlike Eliza, who couldn't even be bothered to balance a checkbook." He glanced at his phone. A text from Victoria. Got the seating chart. We're nowhere near him. But I have a plan. Wear the Tom Ford tux. We need to look like we already own the world. He smiled. Yes, he said to the empty room. We do. He had shed his useless past, and he was rocketing toward a future where no one could ever question his power again. He was an architect, and he was building a skyscraper on the ashes of his first, failed marriage. Eliza sat in the small, cluttered back office of the Seraphine Gallery. In front of her was a detailed spreadsheet of the gallery's inventory, its overhead, and its, to be frank, disappointing profit and loss statement. Her boss, a kind but flustered woman named Mrs. Delacourt, believed Eliza was just good with numbers and had tasked her with finding a way to make the upcoming auction profitable. In reality, Eliza was performing due diligence. Her phone, a simple, nondescript model, vibrated on the desk. The screen lit up with a single, unchangeable ID. Father. She stared at it. For a long moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail. She had, in the past, let it ring for days. But today, after the encounter with Beatrice and Victoria, the simple, burning word, useless, made her thumb press the accept button. You called, she said, her voice flat. A deep, gravelly voice, accustomed to moving markets and toppling governments, answered. It was, as always, devoid of preamble. Elizabeth, your sabbatical has lasted 5 years and 3 months. You are still evaluating that minor canvas cellar? It's an art gallery, Father, and it's a potential acquisition for the Foundation's Arts Incubator program. Due diligence is what you taught me. A dry huff. I taught you to assess a billion-dollar merger in an afternoon, not to count paintbrushes. This is a hobby. It's a life, Eliza said softly, but with a spine of steel he knew well. It's the one I chose, the one away from Vance Holdings, away from the name. You wanted to be normal, he finished, the word laced with disdain. You wanted to be loved for your true self. How did that experiment work out, Elizabeth? You married a charlatan, a self-important peacock who didn't love you. He loved the idea of a docile, aimless wife, a convenient, pretty blank slate. You were right to leave him. You were weak to stay so long. Eliza closed her eyes. It was the same argument they'd had for years. She had run from his gilded cage, desperate to prove she wasn't just Arthur Vance's daughter, and had flown directly into Julian's. Julian, who saw her quiet nature not as strength, but as emptiness. He had projected onto her the useless tag because it made him feel powerful. Why did you call, Father? The Heart's Hope Gala, he said, switching topics instantly. You will be attending. Eliza's blood ran cold. Absolutely not. I'm not Elizabeth Vance. I'm Eliza. I'm just Eliza. I can't go to that. You can and you will, he commanded. Not as my daughter. As yourself. Mrs. Delacourt's gallery is, as you know, a beneficiary of the Foundation. They are donating a piece for the auction. You will go as the gallery's representative. You will stand with the art. You will observe. Observe what? You, from a distance? I am observing you, Elizabeth. And I am observing a potential investment. A small, obnoxious tech firm called Sterling Innovations. Their CEO is overly aggressive. Vapid. But the tech has potential. They have been bombarding my office for weeks. Eliza's stomach twisted into a knot. Sterling Innovations, Julian's company. There was a long, heavy silence. When Arthur Vance spoke again, his voice was a different, more dangerous kind of cold. Your ex-husband. Yes. I see. This complicates matters. I don't see why, Eliza said, her voice hardening. My personal life has nothing to do with your business. It never has. Don't be a fool, child, he snapped. Everything is business, and this is now interesting. This Julian Sterling. He doesn't know, does he? He has no idea, Eliza said. To him, I'm the useless, dependent wife he graciously cut loose. He thinks I came from a modest, middle-class family that's long gone. Another pause, this one filled with a chilling, calculating energy. Good, Arthur Vance said. Then your attendance at the gala is no longer a request. It is a necessity. You will be my eyes and ears. I want to see how this peacock struts when he doesn't know the lion is in the room. I want to know the character of the man asking for my money, and you are going to show me. I am not a prop in one of your games, she shot back. No, he agreed, his voice softening just a fraction. You are not. You are my daughter. And it is long past time you remembered what that means. It doesn't mean hiding in a dusty shop. It means you hold the power. It means you are never useless. The line clicked dead. Eliza sat in the silence of the back office, the P&L statement forgotten. Her father was wrong. He thought she was hiding. But she wasn't. She was waiting. She had been in the shadows for so long, she wasn't sure she remembered how to step into the light. But now, it seemed, the light was coming to find her. Julian, Victoria, and her father all converging on one night. It wasn't a party, it was a collision course. The week leading up to the Heart's Hope Gala was a special kind of hell for Julian. His desperation was a tangible thing, a metallic taste in his mouth. Every attempt to breach the walls of Vance Holdings had failed. His calls were routed to an assistant's assistant. His emails were met with automated replies. His carefully curated proposal, the one detailing the revolutionary synergy of their platforms, was met with deafening silence. "This is impossible," he roared, slamming his phone down on his desk. The orchid petals shivered. "It's like the man doesn't exist. He's a ghost." "He exists," Victoria said, not looking up from her tablet. She was seated on his minimalist leather sofa, her legs crossed. She was vetting designer gowns. "And you're going about this all wrong, Julian. You're acting thirsty. These people like Arthur Vance, they can smell desperation. It's like," she wrinkled her nose, "like cheap cologne. So what do you suggest, Victoria? We just hope he wanders over to our table at the gala?" "No," she said, finally looking up. Her eyes were bright and hard. "We create an event, a moment. I've been doing my homework. Vance doesn't just give to this charity. His late wife, Ilara Vance, founded it. This gala, it's his one, personal vulnerability. He doesn't care about tech. He cares about this." "So, we make a donation?" Julian said, confused. "Ugh, no," she scoffed. "He's a billionaire. Our donation would be a rounding error. No, we have to show that we share his values. The auction. That's the key." "The art auction?" "Yes. It's the centerpiece of the evening. They auction off 5 or 6 major pieces. The rumor is Vance himself quietly bids on one every year, through a proxy, for his private collection. That's our in. We're going to bid on the same piece he's bidding on." Julian stared at her. "Are you insane? We can't afford to get into a bidding war with Arthur Vance. We don't have to win, Julian. We just have to bid. We drive the price up. We show we're in the same league. We're passionate about the art, passionate about the charity. We're not just tech drones. We're philanthropists. We're peers. Then, after we graciously lose the bid to him, you go up to his proxy, congratulate them and say, 'Mr. Vance has excellent taste. I'd love to discuss his taste in technology as well.' It's brilliant." Julian let the plan settle in his mind. It was brilliant. It was audacious, public, and it positioned them exactly as he wanted to be seen. "Victoria, you are a genius," she smiled. "I know. Now, the main piece this year is apparently from some small, local place called the Seraphine Gallery. Some dreadful contemporary thing. We'll need to look it up, pretend to be experts on the artist." Seraphine Gallery? Julian's mind churned. The name was familiar. "Wait, that's... My God, that's where Eliza works." Victoria's smile vanished. "What? That's her little job." "The gallery." Victoria was silent for a moment, her mind racing. Then a slow, malicious smile spread across her face. Oh, that's not a problem. That's a bonus." "How? Don't you see? She'll be there, working, probably fetching champagne or standing by the painting like a little museum guard." "Julian, this is perfect. It's the ultimate power move. We'll be bidding tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, on a painting from the very shop where your useless ex-wife works. The contrast, the symbolism, it's poetic." Julian pictured it. Him in his Tom Ford tux, paddle in the air, a titan of industry, and across the room, Eliza in her drab little work uniform, watching him conquer the world she had abandoned, watching him with the new, superior woman who understood his greatness. The desperation in his gut was replaced by a hot, thrilling surge of power. "It is poetic," he agreed, his voice low. The facade of his stress and anxiety didn't just crumble, he tore it down. He was no longer a desperate man trying to get a meeting. He was a king, about to claim his throne, and the entire world, including his pathetic ex-wife, was about to watch. The ballroom at Cipriani Wall Street was a staggering sea of opulence. Vaulted ceilings soared into the darkness, Greek columns stood like sentinels, and the air shimmered with the light of 1,000 diamonds and the sound of cultivated, powerful laughter. This was not a party. It was a display of a very specific, very insulated stratum of human existence. Julian felt like he was breathing rarefied air. His Tom Ford tux fit like a second skin. Victoria, on his arm, was a vision in a blood-red Givenchy gown, her diamonds flashing like weapons. They had arrived. "Right," Victoria murmured, her eyes scanning the room. "Table 42. It's in the back. But that's fine. We're not here to sit. We're here to hunt. The auction starts in 30 minutes. As they navigated the tables, Julian scanned the room, not for Arthur Vance, but for Eliza. He spotted her almost immediately. She was standing, as Victoria had predicted, by the art display. The centerpiece was a large, dramatic canvas of abstract, swirling colors. Eliza was not in a drab uniform. She was wearing a simple, floor-length gown of the deepest midnight blue. It had no jewels, no sequins. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant chignon. She wore no jewelry save for a pair of simple pearl earrings. And yet, she was drawing looks. There was a stillness to her, a self-possession that was new. She wasn't a flustered gallery assistant. She looked, Julian thought with a pang of annoyance, like she belonged there. "There she is," Victoria hissed, noticing his gaze. "God, she even looks boring. Look at her, just standing there, like a piece of the furniture." "Let's go say hello," Julian said, a cruel smile touching his lips. He needed to re-establish the narrative in his own head. He needed to see her flinch. They cut a path directly toward her. Eliza saw them coming. Her face remained perfectly neutral. "Eliza, dear," Julian said, his voice booming slightly, drawing the attention of a few people nearby. "I am just stunned to see you here. I didn't realize the help was allowed to mingle before the main event." Eliza looked at him. Her eyes were clear, and for the first time, He realized they weren't brown, but a deep, dark green. Julian, Victoria. The gallery was invited to present the auction's feature piece. I'm the gallery's representative. The representative? Oh, that's a lovely way to put it, Victoria chimed in, laughing as if Eliza had told a delightful joke. Well, you and the painting, you both look very well staged. She ran a hand down the fabric of Julian's suit jacket. My Julian is just so excited for this auction. We're planning to bid on this very painting, a little memento of the night, a night where he's closing the biggest deal of his life. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. He's in talks with Vance Holdings, you know. He's finally free of all his past failures. He's about to be a legend, and you're here, selling paintings. It's adorable. Eliza's gaze didn't waver. It simply shifted from Victoria to Julian. Is that what you're doing, Julian? Closing a big deal? The biggest of my life, he confirmed, puffing his chest slightly. It's a little complex. You wouldn't understand the financials. But let's just say that by tomorrow, the world is going to look very different. I have no doubt, Eliza said, her voice soft. The world can change in an instant. Julian, darling, look. Victoria suddenly gasped, grabbing his arm. That's Mrs. Astor, the head of the committee, and, oh my God, there's a man with her. He's... Julian turned. A small entourage was moving from a private alcove toward the stage. At its center was a woman in her 70s, but the man beside her. He was older, with a shock of white hair and the most piercing, intelligent eyes Julian had ever seen. He moved with an authority that made everyone else in the room seem like a child. That's him, Julian whispered, his heart hammering. That's Arthur Vance. He's here, Victoria breathed, her fingers digging into his arm. He's out here. This is our chance. He's going to the stage, Julian said, his mind racing. The auction. Our plan. It's perfect. He'll be watching as we bid. Julian gave Eliza one last, triumphant smirk. You should watch this, Eliza. This is how real success is made. Not by standing in the shadows, but by taking what you want, right out in the open. I will, Eliza said, her eyes never leaving the stage. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Julian took Victoria's arm, and they moved to their table, their hearts pounding with the thrill of the hunt. They were so focused on the stage, on the man walking toward it, that they failed to notice the small, almost imperceptible nod Arthur Vance gave as his eyes swept the room. A nod that was aimed directly at the useless woman in the simple blue dress, standing by the art. The auctioneer, a charismatic man with a rapid-fire delivery, had just sold a week on a private island for an astonishing sum. The room was buzzing, champagne-fueled and generous. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer boomed, our final and most significant item of the evening, a stunning piece by the visionary artist Kalen Locke, generously donated by the Seraphine Gallery. Andromeda's Echo. We will start the bidding at $50,000. This is it, Julian whispered to Victoria. He raised his paddle. 50,000. We have 50,000, the auctioneer called. Do I hear 75? A paddle went up in the corner. 75,000. 100, Julian shot back, his voice firm. He felt powerful. He glanced at Arthur Vance, who was seated in the front row, watching the stage with a placid expression. 100,000. Do I hear 125? The paddle in the corner. 125. 150, Julian declared. This is getting expensive, Victoria hissed, her smile tightening. It's an investment, Julian replied. The paddle in the corner immediately went up. 175, 200, Julian said, his jaw tight. The room was quiet now. This was a real battle. We have $200,000 from Mr. Sterling, the auctioneer announced. Going once, going twice, 250,000. The voice came from the front row. It was quiet, amplified by a microphone held by an assistant. Arthur Vance had not raised a paddle. He had simply spoken. The room erupted in applause. Julian's heart sank, but he quickly recalibrated. This was the plan. This was better than the plan. What a gesture, the auctioneer cried. Sold to Mr. Arthur Vance. As the applause died down, Mrs. Astor, the committee head, stepped to the microphone. Thank you, Arthur. Your generosity, as always, is the bedrock of our foundation. She consulted her notes. And now, a special word of thanks. We are not only grateful for this final, magnificent bid, but also to the curator who sourced this piece and who has personally overseen the Foundation's new Elara Vance Children's Wing art program for the past year. Julian and Victoria clapped politely, already scheming about how to intercept Vance as he left. This woman, Mrs. Astor continued, her voice warm, has worked tirelessly, and she has done so in perfect anonymity, as was her wish. But tonight, we insisted, please join me in thanking the head of our acquisitions committee and the true heart behind our new wing, Ms. Elizabeth Vance. The spotlight didn't move to the stage. It swiveled, sweeping across the room, and landed directly on Eliza. She was standing, as she had been all night, by the painting. She looked, for a second, caught. Then, she simply inclined her head, a graceful, royal acknowledgement. The ballroom was utterly silent. You could hear a diamond drop. Julian's blood had not just run cold. It had frozen in his veins. He stared, his mouth hanging open. Elizabeth Vance? He whispered. It was impossible. It was a joke. Victoria's face had gone a chalky, skeletal white. Her perfectly painted red mouth was a small O of horror. No, Julian said, standing up. No, that's Eliza Sterling, my ex-wife. She works at the gallery. She's useless. His voice, in the silent room, was tragically loud. Every head turned toward him. And then every head turned back to the stage as Arthur Vance stood and took the microphone from Mrs. Astor. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked directly at Julian. His voice was not the gravelly phone call voice. It was a clear, cold, arctic blade of a voice that cut through the entire, vast room. Mr. Sterling, isn't it? Of Sterling Innovations. Julian felt his legs might buckle. Mr. Vance, there's been a mistake. The only mistake, Arthur Vance said, was yours. You're right about one thing. That is indeed your ex-wife. He walked off the stage, across the floor, and stopped directly in front of Eliza. He put a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of profound, unshakable ownership and pride. What you and the rest of the world failed to realize, Vance continued, his voice resonating with cold fury, is that she is also my daughter, the sole heir to Vance Holdings, the useless woman you discarded. Victoria made a small, strangled sound, like a dying bird. The art program, Julian stammered. The little job, her little job, Eliza said, and her voice, though quiet, was now the only sound in the universe, was managing a $50 million philanthropic fund for the children's wing, the Seraphine Gallery. I was finalizing its acquisition. My father's foundation is turning it into a non-profit incubator for young artists. My hobby, as you called it. She looked at him, and for the first time, he didn't see the quiet, mousy woman. He saw the cold, brilliant intelligence of her father. He saw a lioness. You said I wouldn't understand the financials of your deal, she said. My proposal, Arthur Vance cut in, was forwarded to her, as are all proposals related to our tech and media divisions. She is the head of that division. "I read your proposal last night, Julian," Eliza said. "The one you sent 3 times. It's reckless and arrogant." Those were my exact notes. You over-leveraged your company to acquire the new patents. Your entire infrastructure is a house of cards. You're not innovative. You're just desperate. She used his own word against him. Desperate. "As for your bid tonight," Arthur Vance said, with a dismissive wave, "it was a pathetic and transparent display. My daughter and I," he gestured to the painting, "bought that piece this afternoon. Your little bidding war was with my proxy, who was under instructions to let you win if you'd been stupid enough to go over 250K. We wanted to see how far you'd go to empty your pockets for a facade." Julian Sterling's world did not just crumble, it was detonated. He looked at Victoria, who was now 6 feet away from him, as if he were diseased. He looked at the faces of the investors, the power brokers, the society icons, all staring at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was a joke, a fool. Arthur Vance put his arm around Eliza's waist. "My attorneys from Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, will be contacting your board first thing in the morning to discuss the inaccuracies in your proposal. As for your partnership, it's dead. Now, if you'll excuse us, my daughter and I have a gala to enjoy." They turned, and as one walked away, leaving Julian Sterling standing alone in the ruins of his ambition, finally understanding what it truly meant to be useless. The aftermath was not a quiet fallout. It was a corporate carpet bombing. The news of Julian Sterling's public humiliation at the Heart's Hope Gala spread through the financial world by morning. The phrase, "reckless and arrogant," Eliza's exact words, was leaked by an anonymous board member from Vance Holdings and appeared in the Wall Street Journal by noon. Sterling Innovation stock, which was public, unlike the private Vance empire, didn't just fall. It plummeted off a cliff. Shareholders, realizing their CEO had not only failed to secure the deal of a lifetime, but had personally insulted the family that held the keys, filed a class action suit. Gregory, the partner Julian had so often dismissed, staged a boardroom coup, backed by the remaining investors. Julian was out. Ousted from his own company, his name stripped from the letterhead. Victoria Thorne was gone by sunrise. The engagement was called off via a text from her lawyer. The 10-carat diamond was left on the steel desk, its sparkle as cold and empty as the promises that had been made over it. Julian, it turned out, had financed the ring, the Maybach, and the penthouse on the expectation of the Vance deal. With that gone, he was more than broke. He was a cautionary tale. He was last seen by Beatrice, his mother, arguing with a barista at the same cafe where they had once mocked Eliza. He looked thin, grey, and utterly defeated. But this story was never really about Julian. It was about Eliza. She did not, as her father had hoped, take her seat at the head of the boardroom table at Vance Holdings. The day after the gala, she was not in a power suit. She was in jeans at the Seraphine Gallery, overseeing its transition. When her father arrived, he found her not in the office, but on a ladder, helping a young, nervous artist hang a new piece. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice echoing in the emptying room. She looked down, a small smile on her face. "Father, come to count paintbrushes." He ignored the barb. "The Sterling board has accepted your terms. They're liquidating his assets. You were thorough." "I was fair," Eliza corrected. "I gave Gregory, the actual talent, a path to solvency. I just removed the reckless part. So, "You're done," he said. It wasn't a question. "Your desk is waiting. Your name is on the door. Elizabeth Vance, President of Global Acquisitions." Eliza slowly climbed down the ladder. She stood before him, her father, the man who was a legend, the man who had, in his own way, called her useless too for wanting a different life. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Arthur's eyes narrowed. "No, I'm not coming back to the 60th floor. I'm not going to be Elizabeth Vance, President. Not your way." "What is this?" he demanded. After we finally showed them." "You showed them," Eliza said, "but I need to show me. You taught me that everything is business. Julian taught me that love can be a brutal transaction. And I learned that I don't want to be in the business of useless, not labeling it, not feeling it." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she said, gesturing to the gallery, "that this is my division, the Vance Ilara Arts Foundation. Not as a hobby, not as a sabbatical, as its CEO. I will run it. I will make it the most powerful arts incubator in the world. I will find the talent no one else sees. I will leverage the Vance name, but I will do it my way. For them." She pointed to the young artist who was watching them with wide eyes. Arthur Vance looked at his daughter. He didn't see the quiet girl who had run away. He didn't see the broken wife who had come home. He saw for the first time an equal, a woman who had taken his power, her ex-husband's cruelty, and her own quiet strength, and forged it into something new, something he hadn't planned for, something better. "Very well, Miss Vance," he said. The use of her name was a concession, a coronation. "Your budget will be on your desk. I'll send you my proposal," Eliza replied, a small, knowing smile on her face. "I'm sure you'll find it authentic." He left her there, in the gallery, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust of the old life as it was swept away to make room for the new. Eliza, finally, was not a daughter. She was not an ex-wife. She was not useless. She was the architect. And she was, at last, building a world where she belonged. 6 months had passed since the night the name Eliza had died, and Elizabeth Vance had been reborn in fire and public humiliation. But the woman who stood in the center of the bustling, light-filled gallery was neither of those people. She was, at last, just Eliza. The Seraphine Gallery was unrecognizable. What had been a dusty, quiet, and slightly desperate space was now the flagship of the Vance Ilara Arts Foundation. The name, which Eliza had chosen, honored her late mother, the woman who had actually founded the Heart's Hope charity, the woman who had loved art with a passion that her father, Arthur, had only ever seen as a hobby. Tonight was the opening of the Foundation's first curated exhibition, New Horizons. It was not a stuffy gala. There were no $1,000-a-plate dinners. It was loud, vibrant, and packed with young artists, students, genuine collectors, and city council members. Wine flowed. A live string quartet played contemporary music, and the air buzzed with genuine excitement. Eliza, dressed in an elegant but practical wide-leg jumpsuit, moved through the crowd with an easy, quiet authority. Her former boss, Mrs. Delacourt, was now the Foundation's chief curator, her face flushed with a joy Eliza had never seen. "It's a triumph, Eliza," Mrs. Delacourt whispered, squeezing her arm. "Caelan's new pieces are transcendent and selling. We've sold the 3 main sculptures already. He deserves it," Eliza smiled. Caelan Locke, the artist whose Andromeda's Echo had been the centerpiece of the gala auction, was now the art world's new sensation. He was across the room, a tall, endearingly awkward man in a paint-splattered but expensive linen shirt, trying to explain his welding technique to a rapt critic from the New York Times. Eliza's little job had, in 6 months, become a powerhouse. Her first act as CEO had been to identify 5 more, Kalins, brilliant artists on the verge of giving up. She didn't just give them a show, she gave them grants, studio space in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, and a healthcare plan. She was, as her father had gruffly noted, building a stable of assets. She called it nurturing potential. A large, imposing figure appeared at her elbow, and the noisy crowd seemed to part for him instinctively. "Father," Eliza said, turning, "I'm glad you came." Arthur Vance, in his usual immaculate bespoke suit, looked profoundly out of place. He was a shark in a koi pond, his sharp eyes scanning the room, the art, the people. He was not looking at the art, he was appraising it. "This is efficient," he finally said, his highest form of compliment. "I read the quarterly report. You've turned this gallery into a self-sustaining entity in 6 months. The New Horizons Fund has already tripled its initial seed money from corporate arts patrons. And this Kalin fellow's prices, they've quadrupled. You cornered the market on his entire early collection before you made him famous. A brilliant, predatory acquisition, Elizabeth." This was his language of love, the only one he truly knew. He saw her, finally, as a Vance. Eliza smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I'm glad the numbers please you, Father. But I just thought his work was beautiful, and when I met him, he was about to sell his welding tools to pay his rent. He was painting in an unheated garage. Now he has a studio, 2 apprentices, and his mother is getting the surgery she's needed for 5 years. That's the ROI I was focused on." Arthur was silent. He looked away from her, at a large, soaring sculpture of bronze and reclaimed glass. "Your mother, Elara, she would have liked this. This noise. This color." He paused, his voice dropping. "She always said I saw the price of everything and the value of nothing. It seems she managed to teach you the difference." It was the closest he would ever come to an apology. It was, for them, a breakthrough. "She did," Eliza said softly. "Will you stay? Kalin wants to thank you." "No," Arthur grunted, already turning. "I have a merger to kill in Zurich, but—" He looked back, his gaze uncharacteristically soft. "Well done, Miss Vance." He was gone. Eliza watched him go, feeling not the old, familiar ache of his disapproval, but a new, quiet sense of partnership. He was the shark, she was the architect, and somehow they had found a way to swim in the same ocean. Later that week, Eliza was in her new office, the old, cluttered back room, now remodeled with clean lines, natural wood, and a large window overlooking a small garden. She was reviewing grant proposals when a news alert popped up on her screen. She rarely clicked on society gossip, but the headline caught her eye. It was from a low-tier blog. The photo was grainy, taken at a nightclub opening. In it, Victoria Thorne was clinging to the arm of a balding, 60-something real estate developer. The caption was snide. "Some faces we haven't seen in a while. Victoria Thorne, once engaged to disgraced tech CEO Julian Sterling, was seen making a valiant effort to network at the opening of Vibe. An onlooker noted she seemed desperate to get into the VIP section. It's a hard fall from Givenchy at the Heart's Hope Gala." Eliza read on. The article mentioned that the Thorne Family Foundation, deeply embarrassed by the scandal and Victoria's appalling judgment, had quietly removed her from the board and significantly reduced her allowance. She was, the blog gleefully noted, no longer on the A-list. She was exactly what she had always feared, an ornament, slightly tarnished, being passed over for newer models. Eliza felt a familiar word echo. Thirsty. Victoria's own insult for Julian. How ironic. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel pity. She felt nothing. A faint, clinical disinterest. She closed the tab. Victoria's story, as far as she was concerned, was over. The same, however, could not be said for Julian. The encounter happened 2 days later. Eliza had ducked into the small cafe, the very one where Beatrice and Victoria had cornered her, to grab a coffee before a meeting. It was raining, a cold, miserable November afternoon. She was shaking out her umbrella when the bell on the door jingled behind her. A man, his shoulders slumped, walked in. He was wearing a thin, wrinkled suit jacket over a faded polo shirt. His hair was thinning, his face gaunt and grey. The arrogant, cut jawline severity was gone, replaced by a haunted, hollow-eyed desperation. He walked past her, toward the now hiring sign taped to the window. Eliza froze. It was Julian. He hadn't seen her. He approached the counter, and the young manager looked up. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Julian said, his voice a dry rasp. I'm here about the assistant manager position. I sent an application online." The manager looked down at a clipboard. "Julian. Sterling?" "Yes." "Right, you have tech experience, not a lot of food service." "I'm a fast learner," Julian said, his voice cracking. "I'm adaptable. I really need this job." Eliza's heart didn't pound. It just ached. A dull, sad ache for the profound, catastrophic waste of a human being. As he turned from the counter, waiting for the manager to get the owner, his eyes met hers. Time stopped. Julian's face went through a rapid, ugly series of contortions. First, disbelief. Then, a hot, dark flush of shame. Then, pure, unadulterated rage. And finally, beneath it all, a pathetic, desperate plea. He saw her, in her cashmere coat, her skin glowing, her entire presence radiating a quiet, unshakable success. He saw the woman he had thrown away. He took a shuffling step toward her. "Eliza." His voice was barely a whisper. "Hello, Julian," she said. Her voice was perfectly even. Not cold, not warm, just a fact. He stammered, looking around, as if hoping no one was watching. I didn't know you still came here." "I like the coffee," she replied, just as she had all those months ago. "Eliza, please," he breathed, and the desperation in his eyes was terrible. "What you did, you didn't have to. You destroyed me. Everything. It's all gone. My company, my everything." Eliza looked at him. She didn't see the monster who had called her useless. She didn't see the husband she had once loved. She saw a weak man, a bully, who had finally been handed the consequences of his own actions. "No, Julian," she said, her voice still quiet, forcing him to lean in to hear it. "I didn't destroy you. You did. You were a house of cards long before I walked into that gala. You built your entire life on a lie. The lie that you were a self-made titan, and that everyone around you was either a tool to be used or a burden to be cut." She picked up her coffee cup from the counter. "You built it," she said, "on the lie that I was useless. You just finally had to face the architect." "I'm sorry," he whispered. It was the desperate plea of a drowning man, not for forgiveness, but for a life raft. He wanted her to fix this. He wanted her to call her father, to make a call, to give him something. Eliza took a sip of her coffee. She shook her head, a small, final, melancholy movement. "You're not sorry, Julian. You're just caught. There's a difference. Mr. Sterling," The manager called from the back office. "Mr. Peterson will see you now." Julian's head snapped around. He looked at the manager, then back at Eliza, his face a mask of primal, agonizing humiliation. He had been dismissed. Not with a shout, not with a public scene. He had been dismissed as an interruption, a ghost. He turned, and without another word, shuffled to the back office for his interview. Eliza watched him go. She put a $5 bill on the counter and walked out into the rain. She didn't look back. That night, she was the last one to leave the gallery. The opening was a triumph, the artists were celebrating, and the foundation was already a success. She walked through the silent, beautiful rooms, the moonlight streaming in. She stopped in front of Andromeda's Echo, the painting from the gala. Her father had insisted it be moved here, on permanent loan. She stood before it, seeing the swirls of dark blue and explosive, hopeful light. The word useless echoed in her mind, one last time. It had been her prison, her father's useless for not wanting his empire, Julian's useless for not being his accessory. But they were both wrong. Her quiet had been observation, her stillness had been assessment, her hobby had been her training. She was not an ornament. She was not a weapon. She was not defined by the name Sterling or even the name Vance. She was Eliza, the architect, the one who saw potential in the paint, in the stone, and in the people everyone else had discarded. She turned off the gallery lights, the click of the switch definitive, and walked out into the vibrant, living city, finally, completely, and incandescently whole. And just like that, Eliza proved that the most powerful person in the room isn't the loudest or the richest. It's the one who knows their own worth. They called her useless because they couldn't use her. They saw her quiet as weakness, but it was the silence of a lion waiting. She didn't need Julian's world, and she didn't need her father's. She built her own. What did you think of Eliza's incredible moment of triumph? Have you ever felt underestimated, only to know you were holding a secret all along? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you loved Eliza's journey and want to hear more stories of karma, justice, and empowerment, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories to tell. It's one thing to be dumped. It's another to be thrown away like yesterday's news because you weren't ambitious enough. For Elena, her ex-husband Mark's betrayal was a cold, sharp knife. He left her for a flashier model, believing he'd left her with nothing. He thought she was destined to be a struggling artist, forever looking in from the outside. But what Mark didn't know is that sometimes the person you discard is the one who ends up holding all the cards. He was about to learn that lesson in the most public, humiliating way possible, all because of a single, unmissable diamond. The silence in the Beacon Hill apartment was the loudest sound Eleanor had ever heard. It had been 6 months since Mark had walked out, and his presence lingered like a phantom limb, a hollow ache where something vital used to be. The apartment, which they had chosen together for its charming brickwork and proximity to the Boston Common, now felt like a gilded cage she could no longer afford. Every elegant light fixture, every polished hardwood floorboard mocked her. Mark had not just left. He had condemned. "I just can't do this anymore, Elena," he'd said, standing by the door with a suitcase she didn't recognize, a sleek, graphite-colored Rimowa that must have cost more than her last 3 paychecks. "Do what anymore?" she had asked, her hands covered in charcoal dust from the sketches she'd been working on. He had gestured vaguely, his handsome face, the one she'd loved for 8 years, twisted in a mask of pity and impatience. The struggling artist thing, the dreaming. I'm a partner at Stratton Price Advisory, Elena. I need a wife who is on my level, not one who is playing with charcoal in a $3 a month apartment. I need someone who wants more. The words had struck her harder than a physical blow. Playing. He had always called her passion, a hobby, something to keep her busy while he did the real work in the financial district. He'd conveniently forgotten that her hobby, through freelance interior design consultations, had furnished this very apartment and paid for their last 3 vacations. But Mark only saw a balance sheet, and in his, she was a liability. He had a new partner, he'd admitted. Her name was Tiffany. Elena had seen her once, at a company holiday party. Tiffany worked in marketing at a rival firm, and she was everything Elena was not. Tall, blonde, with a laugh that sounded like shattered glass, and an aggressive ambition that matched Mark's. She wore her designer labels like armor, and her eyes had scanned Eleanor with dismissive appraisal. The divorce was swift and brutal. Mark, with his team of ruthless Stratton Price lawyers, argued that her business, Willow Creek Interiors, was a non-entity. He kept the apartment, the stocks, the car. He left her with her hobby and a small cash settlement that was, in his words, generous, but would barely cover 6 months' rent on a decent studio in the city. Elena had moved into a small 3rd-floor walk-up in Somerville, a world away from the manicured lawns of Beacon Hill. The apartment was cramped, the light was poor, and the walls were thin. But it was hers. For the first 2 months, she'd barely sketched. The betrayal had hollowed her out, leaving behind a brittle shell of self-doubt. Mark's final words echoed in her mind. I need someone who wants more. She had looked at her hands, stained and calloused. She did want more. She wanted her designs to be built, not just sketched. She wanted to create spaces that felt like home, not just status symbols. Mark had wanted a trophy. She had just wanted a partner. One rainy Tuesday, drowning in instant coffee and the smell of her neighbor's cooking, Elena opened her laptop. She looked at her meager savings. It was enough to fold and get a real job, as Mark would say, or it was enough to make one desperate, terrifying push. She chose the push. She spent every cent of that generous settlement on building a professional website, creating stunning 3D renderings of her best concepts, and printing portfolio books that felt heavy and important in her hands. She sent out over 200 cold emails to architects, developers, and corporate heads across Boston. She networked at small, awkward events, handing out her new business card, her hand shaking slightly every time. Most emails went unanswered. Most conversations led nowhere. But Eleanor was fueled by something new. It wasn't just passion anymore, it was spite. It was a burning need to prove, not to Mark, but to the ghost of herself that he had tried to leave behind, that she was not a hobby. She was a professional. 6 months after the divorce, her life was a grueling routine of cheap groceries, late-night revisions, and the constant, nagging fear of failure. But in that small, cramped apartment, something was starting to grow. Willow Creek Interiors had landed 2 small clients, a dental office reception area and a condo lobby in the seaport. It was barely paying the bills, but it was a start. She was tired, she was lonely, but for the first time in a long time, the silence in her apartment didn't sound like an ache. It sounded, faintly, like opportunity. The aroma of roasted coffee and buttery pastries was Eleanor's one small, affordable luxury. The Bluestone, a bustling cafe on Newbury Street, was her unofficial office. She couldn't afford a proper studio, so she would buy a large black coffee, find a corner table, and spread her sketches out, tuning out the world with her headphones. It was here she felt most like her old self, creative, focused, and anonymous. It was a crisp October afternoon. The trees lining the fashionable street were a blaze of gold and crimson. Elena was deep in concentration, finalizing a lighting schematic for the Seaport condo. She was using a new software, and her brow was furrowed as she cross-referenced the specs on her laptop. And I told him, if it's not at least 3 carats, don't even bother bringing it back. The voice cut through her music, sharp and familiar. Eleanor flinched, her heart leaping into her throat. She looked up, pulling one earbud out. There he was. Mark. He looked exactly the same, disgustingly so. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed. He wore a navy blue Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than her entire month's earnings, the jacket unbuttoned to reveal a crisp white shirt. And beside him, clinging to his arm, was Tiffany. Tiffany was a vision of expensive maintenance. Her blonde hair was a perfect, icy balayage. She wore a tight white sweater dress and knee-high suede boots. A massive, square-cut diamond glittered on her left hand, and she was angling it deliberately to catch the light as she spoke. They hadn't seen her. They were in line, waiting to order, and Mark was laughing at Tiffany's 3 carats comment, his eyes crinkling in that way Eleanor had once found so endearing. Now it just looked predatory. Eleanor's first instinct was to bolt, to gather her things and run out the back door, sparing herself the inevitable, humiliating confrontation. But she was pinned by her laptop, her charger, and the tangle of papers. Before she could move, Mark turned from the counter, latte in hand, and his eyes scanned the room. They met hers. For a split second, his smile faltered. His eyes widened, just slightly, in genuine surprise. Then, just as quickly, the mask of smug superiority snapped back into place. He nudged Tiffany. "Well, well," he said, striding over to Eleanor's table. He didn't ask to sit. He simply leaned against the adjacent table, towering over her. "Eleanor, fancy seeing you here. Still playing with your crayons?" His gaze drifted over her sketches with performative disinterest. Eleanor felt a hot flush of anger and shame creep up her neck. She slowly closed her laptop. "Hello, Mark," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Tiffany." Tiffany's smile was all teeth. "Oh, hi, Elena. It's so good to see you." Her eyes did a quick, insulting scan of Elena's outfit, a simple black turtleneck, jeans and worn ankle boots. It was the uniform of someone who worked, not someone who lunched. "Mark, honey, isn't this the little cafe you used to take me to?" Tiffany asked, ignoring Eleanor entirely. "The one with the charming, crumbly scones." "The very one," Mark said, sipping his coffee. Elena always did love her little haunts. I, for one, have discovered the joys of the espresso bar at L'Appartement. They import their beans from Italy. The message was clear. I have moved on. I have upgraded. "This is a lovely spot for working," Tiffany said, her eyes landing on Eleanor's spread-out papers. "It's just so brave, really. Putting yourself out there with your art. I could never. I just don't have the time between the club and the charity board." "Tiffany is co-chairing the Children's Hospital benefit this year," Mark said, puffing his chest out. "It's a lot of responsibility." "Oh, stop!" Tiffany giggled, swatting his arm. She then, as if just remembering it was there, held up her left hand to admire her ring. "I'm just so slammed. Wedding planning is a full-time job. Mark, we still have to decide between the floral arrangements from Paris or the ones from Holland. It's a nightmare." Elena just nodded. She refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She would not cry. She would not snap. She was a block of ice. "So this is it, then," Mark pressed, gesturing to her laptop. Willow Creek Interiors. Still trying to make that happen? It's going well, thank you, Elena said, her voice tight. That's great, Mark said, in the same patronizing tone he used to use when she'd sell a small painting. Good for you. It's important to have a hobby. Keeps you busy. He tossed his empty paper cup into the nearby trash, a perfect shot. He was always good at that. Well, he said, sliding his arm around Tiffany's waist and pulling her close. We should get going. We have reservations at l'Orangerie, and you know how they are about punctuality, and Tiff still needs to stop at Cartier. Another one, Elena heard herself ask, and instantly regretted it. Tiffany laughed. Oh no, silly. Just a little. Congratulations on the engagement. Present from Mark. A matching tennis bracelet. He's just too good to me. She kissed him, a loud, performative smack. Mark smirked at Elena over Tiffany's shoulder. You've got to invest in what matters, Elena. You should know that. He turned, and without another word, they swept out of the cafe, a cloud of expensive perfume and smug satisfaction in their wake. Elena sat perfectly still for a full 5 minutes. The cafe buzzed around her, but she was in a silent, cold vacuum. You've got to invest in what matters. He hadn't just left her. He had written her off as a bad investment, a failed stock. The anger she expected didn't come. Instead, a cold, hard resolve settled in her stomach. She opened her laptop. She looked at the lighting schematic. She deleted it. The client's budget was tight, but she knew a way to make it look twice as expensive. She would use polished concrete instead of tile, and source vintage sconces from a dealer in Vermont. It would be better. Mark thought she was playing with crayons in a cafe. He had no idea she was building an empire. For the next 4 months, Elena worked with a singular, ferocious focus. The encounter with Mark and Tiffany had been a painful accelerant, turning her simmering resolve into a white-hot flame. She finished the Seaport lobby to rave reviews, and the dental office project won a small, local design award, which she immediately plastered across her new, improved website. The award led to a few more mid-level projects, allowing her to finally rent a small, shared studio space in the South End. It was barely a room, but it had high ceilings, brilliant natural light, and most importantly, it was not her apartment or a coffee shop. She was beginning to feel like a legitimate business owner. One afternoon, an email landed in her inbox that made her heart stop. Subject: Design Consultation. Covington Capital Partners. The name was legendary in Boston. Covington Capital was one of the largest and most respected private equity firms in the country. They were known for their discretion, their staggering wealth, and their enigmatic CEO, Arthur Covington. The email was from his executive assistant, a woman named Ms. Davies, requesting a meeting to discuss the redesign of their main executive floor. Elena stared at the screen, convinced it was a mistake. They must have meant to email a major firm, like Gensler or Hockey. Her tiny, one-woman operation. It was impossible. She replied with trembling fingers, confirming her availability. A meeting was set for the following Monday. Elena spent the entire weekend preparing as if for war. She researched Covington Capital's portfolio, their investment philosophy, clarity, tradition, vision, and Arthur Covington himself. There wasn't much. He was intensely private, a widower in his late 50s, a known patron of the arts, and notoriously demanding. He was old money, and his firm's offices in the top 3 floors of the Hancock Tower were rumored to be dated and stuffy. She arrived 30 minutes early, her largest portfolio book in hand, wearing her one good suit, a navy blue wool blend from Theory that she'd bought on consignment. The Covington offices were exactly as she'd imagined. Seas of dark mahogany, heavy brocade curtains, and landscapes in ornate gold frames. It was a museum of 1980s corporate power. Ms. Davies, an impeccably dressed woman in her 60s, led Eleanor to a vast corner office. "Mr. Covington will be right with you." Elena stood in the center of the room, taking it all in. The desk was the size of a car. The view was staggering, overlooking the entire city and the harbor beyond. "Ms. Reed." The voice was deep and resonant. Elena turned. Arthur Covington was not what she expected. He wasn't a booming, aggressive titan. He was tall, silver-haired, and possessed an almost academic calm. He wore a simple, perfectly tailored grey suit, and his eyes were a piercing, intelligent blue. "Mr. Covington." "Thank you for seeing me," Elena said, extending her hand. He shook it firmly. "The pleasure is mine. Your work on the Seaport project was brought to my attention. The use of mixed metals and concrete was unexpected. In a good way." Elena blinked. "You've seen it?" "I own the building," he said simply, as if stating the weather. He gestured for her to sit. "My associates wanted a large, established firm. I find established is often a synonym for boring. I am tired of boring, Miss Reed. I am tired of this." He swept his hand across his own office. "This room screams, I am very rich and very predictable. I want something else." For the next hour, Elena didn't just present. She talked. She found herself forgetting her nerves, speaking passionately about the psychology of space. "The problem isn't the mahogany, Mr. Covington," she said, opening her sketchbook. "It's the weight. Your philosophy is clarity, tradition, vision. The tradition is here," she pointed to the wood. "But there is no clarity. It's dark. And there is no vision. It's stagnant. It looks backward, not forward." He watched her, his expression unreadable, as she laid out her preliminary idea. She proposed keeping the mahogany-paneled walls, but treating them with a lighter, modern stain. She suggested ripping out the heavy carpets and exposing the concrete subfloor, polishing it to a high gloss. She would replace the heavy desks with minimalist, custom-built pieces, and install modern, sculptural lighting. And the art, she would replace the staid landscapes with bold, large-scale contemporary pieces from local Boston artists. "It's a blend," she finished, her voice ringing with conviction. "You honor the tradition of the firm's history, but showcase its forward-thinking vision. It's power, but it's intelligent. It's confident, not arrogant." Arthur Covington was silent for a long moment. He steepled his fingers, his blue eyes fixed on her sketch. Elena's heart hammered. She had overstepped. She had called his office arrogant. "Confident, not arrogant," he repeated softly. He looked up at her, and for the first time, a small smile touched his lips. "You've been in my office for 1 hour, Ms. Reed, and you understand my company better than the partners who have been here for 20 years. When can you start?" The Covington project consumed Elena's life for the next 8 months. It was a trial by fire. The budget was astronomical, but so were the expectations. Arthur Covington was a meticulous client. He demanded perfection, but he was also, to Eleanor's surprise, incredibly collaborative. They met daily, first in the dust-filled construction zone of the executive floor, and later over dinners to discuss fabric swatches and art acquisitions. Arthur, it turned in, was not just a patron of the arts. He was a deeply knowledgeable collector. He and Elena would spend hours debating the merits of a specific sculptor or the emotional impact of a color palette. Elena found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone since the divorce. She told him about her hobby and the stifling marriage that had nearly extinguished it. He misunderstood, Arthur said one evening, swirling the wine in his glass at a quiet table at Mamma Maria in the North End. Ambition isn't about the size of your bank account. It's about the relentless pursuit of excellence in your chosen field. By that definition, Eleanor, you are the most ambitious person I have ever met." His words settled over her like a warm blanket. He wasn't just validating her work, he was validating her. He saw her, not as a hobbyist, but as a visionary. Their relationship shifted. It was slow, subtle, and built on a foundation of mutual respect that was stronger than any whirlwind romance. He was fascinated by her creativity. She was grounded by his stability and kindness. He was nothing like Mark. He didn't need to be the center of the universe. He was a universe unto himself, and he was inviting her in. When the executive floor was finally unveiled, it was a triumph. Architectural Digest did a feature. Elena's phone began ringing off the hook. Willow Creek Interiors was suddenly the most sought-after design firm in Boston. She had to hire a small team. She moved into a beautiful new studio in Fort Point. One evening, 6 months after the project's completion, Arthur took her to the Gardner Museum for a private, after-hours tour. They stood in the courtyard, the scent of flowers hanging in the air. "This," Elena whispered, "is my favorite place in the city. It's a masterpiece, but it's also intimate. It feels personal." "That's how I feel about you," Arthur said, turning to her. His blue eyes were serious. "You are a masterpiece, Elena. But you are also the most profoundly personal, real woman I have ever known." He reached into his pocket. He didn't kneel. He simply stood before her, as an equal. He opened a small, black velvet box. Elena gasped. The ring was unlike anything she had ever seen. It wasn't the loud, generic boulder that Tiffany had flashed. It was a magnificent, cushion-cut blue diamond, easily 10 carats, flanked by 2 smaller, shield-cut white diamonds. It was an heirloom, a piece of art. The setting was platinum, intricate but elegant. "It's from Lafleur," Arthur said quietly. Lafleur, the legendary, reclusive Parisian jeweler that only dealt with a handful of families worldwide. "My grandmother's ring. I had them restore the setting. It's a perfect blend, don't you think? Tradition and vision." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as she slid the ring onto her finger. It was heavy, cool, and fit perfectly. It wasn't a trophy. It was a promise. Their engagement was kept quiet, just as Arthur preferred. They were happy in their own world. But Ms. Davies, his assistant, insisted on one thing. "You must attend the MFA annual gala, Mr. Covington," she'd said. "You are the primary sponsor of the new Impressionist wing. And, if I may be so bold, sir, it is time for the world to meet the woman who finally made you smile again." Arthur had sighed, but relented. "Elena, my love, are you prepared to face the Boston Society sharks?" Elena, wearing his grandmother's ring, smiled. "After Mark, I think I can handle a few sharks." The Museum of Fine Arts was ablaze with light. The entire Coke Gallery, with its soaring ceilings and Copley paintings, had been transformed into a glittering ballroom. Valets in white gloves rushed to open the doors of Bentleys and high-end Mercedes as Boston's elite streamed up the marble steps. Elena felt a flutter of nerves. This was a world she had only ever grazed. Mark had always craved it. But as his hobbyist wife, she had never truly been invited in. Tonight, she was arriving on the arm of Arthur Covington. She'd chosen her dress with care, a deep emerald green silk gown by a new, independent designer. It was elegant, modern, and understated, letting her and the ring do the talking. Arthur looked timeless in a custom tuxedo. "You look breathtaking," Arthur murmured, squeezing her hand as they stepped out of his car. "Are you ready?" "Ready," she smiled. They bypassed the main line and were escorted through a private entrance to the patron's reception. The moment they entered, a hush fell. The whispers started instantly. All eyes went from Arthur, a man who rarely attended such public events, to the stunning, unfamiliar woman on his arm. And then, all eyes went to the ring. The famous Covington blue diamond. Elena kept her head high, smiling as Arthur introduced her to senators, surgeons, and old money matriarchs. They were polite, curious, and after a glance at the ring, overwhelmingly welcoming. Elena handled it with a grace that made Arthur swell with pride. Across the ballroom, Mark and Tiffany were working the room. Mark was in his element. Stratton Price Advisory had bought a table, and he was schmoozing relentlessly. His primary target for the entire year had been Covington Capital. Landing even a small piece of Arthur Covington's business would make his career. It would guarantee him a senior partnership, and the bonus he needed to pay for the new Back Bay penthouse Tiffany was demanding. He'd been trying to get a meeting with Covington for months, but his calls and emails were always politely and firmly deflected by the impenetrable Ms. Davies. Tonight, he knew Covington was the guest of honor. This was his chance. "There he is," Mark muttered to Tiffany, straightening his bow tie. "By the pillar. Don't look desperate." "He's with someone," Tiffany noted, her eyes narrowing. "She's not bad. Simple dress, though. Probably some boring socialite from Beacon Hill." "Doesn't matter," Mark said, his eyes fixed on Arthur. "He's the whale, Tiff. I'm going to go network. You go get us some champagne and try to look approachable." Tiffany pouted, but obeyed. Mark, meanwhile, began to circle, waiting for a break in the crowd around Arthur. He saw Arthur excuse himself from a conversation with the mayor and turn to his date, his expression softening in a way Mark had never seen on the billionaire's face. Mark started to move forward, a confident, practiced smile plastering itself on his face. He was halfway across the room when Arthur's date turned slightly, catching the light. Mark stopped, confused. His smile faltered. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." From this distance she looked different, more polished. Her hair was swept up, her posture was perfect, but it was unmistakably Elena. He stood frozen, his brain trying to reconcile the image of his mousy, charcoal-stained ex-wife with the elegant woman standing next to the most powerful man in Boston. It had to be a mistake. She was probably a waitress, or no, she was a guest, but maybe she'd come with some low-level artist. Then Tiffany reappeared at his elbow, champagne in hand. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think," Mark pointed, his hand trembling slightly. "That woman with Covington. Look." Tiffany squinted. "Who cares about her? Look at the rock on her hand. My God, Mark, it's massive. It looks blue. Who is she?" Mark's blood ran cold. He started walking, faster now, a sick, churning feeling in his stomach. Tiffany hurried to keep up. "It's just, I think I know her," Mark stammered. They approached the small group just as Arthur was handing Elena a glass of champagne. Elena smiled up at him, a genuine, radiant smile that Mark had not seen in years. "Elena?" Mark said, his voice cracking. Elena and Arthur turned. Elena's smile faded, replaced by a polite, cool mask of neutrality. "Mark? Tiffany. What a surprise." There was a moment of pure, suffocating silence. Mark stared at Elena, his mind short-circuiting. It was her. But it was not. The woman he had discarded, the woman he'd last seen, hunched over a laptop in a cheap cafe, was standing here, poised and radiant, in the center of the most exclusive event in the city. Tiffany, however, recovered first. Her eyes, wide with envy, were glued to the ring on Eleanor's left hand. "Eleanor!" "My goodness," Tiffany gushed, stepping forward, her own diamond suddenly looking like a chip of glass. What What are you doing here? And that ring? Where did you get that? It's incredible. It looks almost real." Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply raised her glass to her lips, the movement deliberately slow, making the blue diamond flash under the chandelier. "It's quite real, Tiffany. I'm glad you like it." Arthur Covington, who had been watching this exchange with a quiet, assessing gaze, stepped forward slightly, placing a protective hand on the small of Elena's back. Mark, still reeling, tried to regain his footing. He had to be in control. "Elena, you look good," he managed, his voice strained. This is Arthur Covington. Mr. Covington, I'm Mark Harrison from Stratton Price Advisory. We've been trying to connect with your team for—" Arthur's eyes remained fixed on Mark, his expression utterly neutral. He did not extend his hand. "Mr. Harrison. Yes, I've seen your emails." The cold, dismissive tone made Mark's blood freeze, but he still hadn't made the final, terrifying connection. He was too focused on the absurdity of Elena being here. "So, Elena," Mark said, forcing a laugh, "What? You're a guest of—" He couldn't bring himself to say it. "She is, yes," Arthur answered for her, his voice smooth as steel. "As my fiancée." The words hit Mark like a physical impact. "Fiancée." He staggered back a half step. Your what?" "Fiancée," Arthur repeated. Tiffany let out a small, strangled squeak. You're engaged? To her?" The insult was overt, and she didn't care. Elena's gaze hardened. "Yes." "But how?" Mark's mind was racing. How could this happen? How could his discarded, ambitionless wife land Arthur Covington? "We met when I hired Miss Reed to redesign my firm's executive offices," Arthur explained, his voice dangerously calm. "Her vision was, and is, extraordinary. Willow Creek Interiors is, in my opinion, the finest design house in this city." Mark's world tilted. Willow Creek Interiors. The hobby. The crayons. It was real. But the ring, Tiffany cut in, her voice shrill with disbelief. That's a blue diamond. That looks like the Covington diamond." "It is," Arthur said. "It was my grandmother's. It's from Lafleur." Lafleur. Mark finally, truly, looked at the ring. And he froze. His heart stopped. His breath hitched. His vision tunneled until the only thing he could see was the impossible, brilliant blue stone on Eleanor's hand. It wasn't just a ring. It was a symbol. It was a legend. He'd read about it in Forbes, the Covington diamond, a ring that signified entry into one of the most powerful families in America. And it was on the hand of the woman he had told lacked ambition. He looked from the ring to Elena's calm, composed face. Then he looked at Arthur Covington, the man whose approval he had desperately sought, the man who held the future of his career in his hand. And he saw the way Arthur was looking at him. It was not with anger. It was with something far worse, complete and utter lack of respect. It was the look a man gives something he is about to discard. In that single, horrifying instant, Mark understood. This wasn't just a social humiliation. This was a professional execution. The man he'd been trying to impress for a year was engaged to the woman he had treated like garbage. He had insulted her. He had insulted her work, the work she had done for Arthur Covington. "Oh my God," Mark whispered, his face draining of all color. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Tiffany, finally sensing the shift in power, looked from Mark's pale, terrified face to Arthur's cold one. "Mark, what's wrong?" Mark couldn't speak. He just stared at Eleanor, at the woman he had so profoundly, so completely, so stupidly misjudged. He saw the woman who had paid for their vacations with her hobby. The woman who had sketched brilliant designs while he watched stock tickers. The woman who was, as Arthur had said, extraordinary. And he had thrown her away for this. He glanced at Tiffany, who was now staring at her own ring with a look of sudden, pathetic disappointment. "Mr. Harrison," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the silence. "I believe I now have all the information I need regarding Stratton Price Advisory. Your firm's judgment appears to be compromised. Ms. Davies will be in touch with your superiors tomorrow." He then turned his back on them completely. "Elena, my love," he said, his voice warm again as he turned to her. "The mayor was just telling me about the new acquisitions. Shall we?" "Yes, let's," Elena said. She gave Mark one last, lingering look. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't angry. It was almost pitying. Then she turned, and on the arm of her fiancé, she walked away, the blue diamond flashing like a warning beacon, leaving Mark and Tiffany standing alone in the center of the ballroom, the whispers of the crowd closing in around them. Mark stood paralyzed. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him. He heard the sudden, sharp whispers. Wasn't that his ex-wife? With Covington? Did you see his face? Tiffany, for her part, was visibly shaking, her face a mask of pale fury and humiliation. "Mark," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You idiot! You told me she was a nothing. You told me she was a failed artist. And she's engaged to Arthur Covington? You let her go?" "Shut up, Tiffany," Mark managed to choke out, grabbing her arm. "Just shut up." He pulled her through the crowd, ignoring the stares and the smirks, and fled the gala. The drive back to their penthouse was silent and frigid, the air thick with the smell of their shared social and financial ruin. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The next morning, before Mark even got to the office, the senior partner of Stratton Price Advisory called him. Ms. Davies had, as promised, been in touch. The Covington Capital account and all its associated potential, hundreds of millions of dollars in management fees, was not just lost, it was scorned. Mark was accused of gross misrepresentation of character and conduct unbecoming of the firm. He was fired. His professional network evaporated overnight. No one would take his calls. The story of his public humiliation at the gala, coupled with the loss of the Covington account, made him toxic. His relationship with Tiffany imploded just as quickly. Without the promise of a senior partnership and the endless river of money, Mark was no longer the man she'd signed up for. The cheap, hollow reflection she had been sold was now just cheap and hollow. The wedding was off. She kept her 3-carat ring, the only thing of value, she screamed, that she'd gotten out of the relationship, and was gone by the end of the week. Mark was left alone in a penthouse he could no longer afford, his career in ashes, all because he had failed to see the value in the one person who had been genuine all along. Elena, meanwhile, never spoke to Mark again. She didn't need to. Her life had become fuller and richer than she could have imagined. Her marriage to Arthur was a partnership of equals, a quiet, strong bond built on admiration and deep, abiding love. Willow Creek Interiors flourished, and Elena became a name synonymous with intelligent, visionary design. She and Arthur split their time between their home in Boston and a quiet estate in the English countryside. She had studios in both. On their first anniversary, she and Arthur were sitting on the terrace of their country home, watching the sunset. Elena twisted the blue diamond on her finger, the light catching its facets. "You're quiet tonight," Arthur said, taking her hand. "I was just thinking," Elena said, "about that night at the gala, about Mark." Arthur's expression tightened, but he waited. "For so long," she continued, "I thought success meant proving him wrong, proving I was ambitious enough. When he saw this ring, I thought I've won. But that wasn't it." "What was it then?" Arthur asked. Elena looked at him, her eyes clear and full of a peaceful, hard-won wisdom. "The ring didn't change my worth, Arthur. It just confirmed that I had finally found someone who could see it. The win wasn't humiliating him. The win was months before that, in that cramped Somerville apartment, when I decided to bet on myself. The win was when I met you, and we talked about art, not balance sheets." She leaned her head on his shoulder. Mark's world was built on status, on what things looked like. He traded me for a flashier model. But he didn't realize that trophies tarnish. "This," she said, holding up her hand, the heirloom ring glowing in the twilight, "is not a trophy. It's a legacy. It's a promise. It's real." Arthur smiled, kissing the top of her head. "Confident, not arrogant," he murmured. Elena smiled back. She was no longer the struggling artist playing with crayons. She was the artist, the visionary, the wife, and the CEO of her own life. And from this high, she didn't need to look down to see Mark. He was simply, and finally, too small to be seen. 5 years is a long time. It is long enough for a wound to become a scar, and for a scar to fade into a faint, silvery line, a story you no longer tell. For Elena, the 5 years since the MFA Gala had been a whirlwind of creation. Willow Creek Interiors was no longer a boutique Boston firm. It was a bi-continental powerhouse with a sought-after office in London's Mayfair district. Her name was now mentioned in the same breath as the design legends she had once studied. Her style, which Vogue had dubbed warm modernism, was a blend of clean lines, rich, natural textures, and an almost psychic understanding of how light and space could comfort the human soul. She and Arthur had a son, Thomas, a bright, happy 3-year-old with his father's blue eyes and his mother's creative, curious hands. Her life was not a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real, it was earned, and it was deeply, profoundly hers. For Mark Harrison, 5 years was an eternity. After being fired from Stratton Price, he had been systematically blacklisted from every major financial institution in New England. The story of his spectacular misjudgment, insulting Arthur Covington's new fiancée, his own ex-wife, at the MFA Gala, had become a cautionary tale whispered in steakhouse bars and at club luncheons. He was the man who had fumbled the whale. Worse, he was the man who hadn't recognized the diamond in his own home. He had been forced to sell the penthouse at a loss. Tiffany had sued him for emotional distress and financial misrepresentation over the broken engagement, a frivolous but public enough suit to drain the last of his severance. He had left Boston in disgrace and moved to Hartford, Connecticut. It was a city he once would have sneered at, a place for insurance actuaries and minor league hockey, not for titans of industry. He now worked as a senior financial analyst for a mid-level insurance firm. He made a comfortable 6 figures, which to his old self would have been a rounding error. He lived in a beige, joyless apartment complex called The Summit at Prospect Hill, a name far grander than the reality of its vinyl siding and cramped balconies. He was 44 years old, and he was a ghost. He was haunted by the phantom of the life he'd been owed, and by the suffocating reality of the one he had. His Tom Ford suits were long gone, replaced by off-the-rack department store replacements that never quite fit his shoulders. The predatory charisma had curdled into a brittle, sour resentment. He was, by every metric he had ever valued, a failure. And he was still obsessed. He subscribed to Architectural Digest, Forbes, and the Boston Globe. He read every article that mentioned Willow Creek interiors. He saw Elena cutting the ribbon on a new pediatric wing she had designed pro bono. He saw her and Arthur named on the top 100 most influential couples list. He saw a candid photo of her laughing in the Boston Public Garden, pushing a stroller. Each image was a fresh twist of the knife. One grey Tuesday in November, Mark was in his usual pre-work haunt, a generic coffee chain called Bean Central, across from his office building. He was nursing a watery drip coffee, staring blankly at the Hartford Courant, when a car pulling up to the curb outside caught his eye. It wasn't a Bentley or a Rolls-Royce. It was a dark, obsidian-coloured Audi A8L, a car that signalled its expense with quiet, confident lines rather than a garish hood ornament. A driver got out and opened the rear passenger door. A woman emerged, and Mark's heart, for the first time in 5 years, simply stopped. It was Eleanor. She was not the woman from the gala, draped in silk and diamonds. This was somehow more intimidating. This was Eleanor, the CEO. She wore a long, beautifully tailored camel hair coat over a cream-coloured turtleneck and black, wide-leg trousers. Her hair was shorter, a chic, sharp bob that framed her face. She looked focused, powerful, and completely, effortlessly elegant. She was on her phone, and as she stepped onto the sidewalk, her voice, clear and warm, cut through the morning traffic. "I will, Thomas. Yes, Mommy has a big meeting, but I'll be home on the train tonight to read Where the Wild Things Are, I promise. Now, give Daddy a kiss for me. I love you both." She hung up, smiling, and turned to a small team of 2 men and a woman who had emerged from a second car. They were all holding portfolios and tablets. "All right," Elena said, her voice shifting from mother to executive. "We're here. The Aetna CEO wants to talk culture before we talk aesthetics. He's worried the new campus will feel sterile. I want to lead with the atrium biophilia and the localized neighborhood hubs." Mark sat frozen, his cheap coffee growing cold in his hand. Aetna. She was here, in his city, to redesign the Aetna corporate campus, a project worth hundreds of millions of dollars. A project his own firm had desperately and unsuccessfully bid on for the insurance contract. He was a ghost, and she was an empress. Before he could think, before he could process the sheer, crushing weight of the irony, a pathetic, primal impulse took over. He had to speak to her. He had to... What? Apologize? Be seen? Prove he still existed? He stumbled from his chair, his hands shaking. He fumbled with his briefcase, jostling the table and sending the last of his coffee splashing onto the front of his light blue shirt. "Damn it!" he hissed. But he didn't stop. He pushed through the glass door of the cafe, his heart hammering a sick, frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Elena!" he called out. His voice was too loud, cracking with a desperation that shamed him. Elena, who had been about to enter the lobby of the Aetna Tower with her team, stopped. She turned, her expression one of polite, professional inquiry, like a stranger had asked her for the time. Her eyes landed on him. The politeness didn't flicker, but a small, quiet spark of recognition lit deep within them. She saw the ill-fitting suit. She saw the prominent, dark coffee stain spreading across his shirt. She saw the haunted, desperate look in his eyes. "Mark," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement. A simple, flat acknowledgement of a familiar object in an unexpected place. Her team stopped, looking curiously between their boss and this disheveled man on the sidewalk. You're here," he stammered, feeling the damp, cold patch of coffee clinging to his skin. "In Hartford." "Yes," she said, her voice perfectly level, devoid of any anger or pity. My firm is designing the new campus. I know, I heard. I just heard you say it. He was rambling. Wow, that's incredible, Elena. Willow Creek, I see it, in the magazines, all the time. Thank you, she said. She glanced at her watch. We're very proud of the work we do. I'm sure, he said, taking a half step forward. He had to say it. He had to unburden himself, to make this crushing weight in his chest go away. Elena, I just want to say, I'm sorry. She tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. Sorry for what, Mark? Was she toying with him? For everything, he choked out, gesturing vaguely. For how I treated you, for what I said. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. I didn't see you. I didn't see any of it. This was it. The confession. The moment of catharsis. He waited for her response. Forgiveness? Absolution? Or even anger? He would have taken anger. Anger, at least, would have meant he still mattered. Elena looked at him for a long, silent moment. She was not the 30-year-old woman he had left, the one who would have dissolved into tears or righteous rage. This was a 42-year-old woman who commanded boardrooms, who was loved by a great man, and who was raising a child. She was complete, and he was just a man with a coffee stain. Yes, you were, she said finally, and the simple, factual agreement was colder than any curse. He flinched. But it was a very long time ago, Mark, she continued, and her voice softened, not with pity, but with a profound, unbridgeable distance. I'm not that person anymore. The woman you hurt, she doesn't exist. She hasn't for years. He stared at her, confused. What? What do you mean? I mean, Elena said, adjusting the strap of her leather satchel, that we're strangers, you and I. We're just two people on a sidewalk who used to know each other. You aren't the man who hurt me, and I am not the woman you left. She gave him a small, impersonal smile. That man, the powerful partner at Stratton Price. He's gone, isn't he? And so is his wife. Her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't forgiving him, because in her mind, there was no one left to forgive. The entire cast of that tragedy had left the stage. He was apologizing to a ghost, and the person he had become was so diminished, he was unrecognizable to her. She had erased him, not out of spite, but out of simple, practical growth. He was a footnote in her biography. I have a meeting, she said, the businesslike tone returning. It was interesting seeing you, Mark. I hope you find what you're looking for. She didn't wait for a reply. She turned, nodded to her team, and said, All right, let's go. Mark stood rooted to the spot, alone on the sidewalk. He watched her walk through the massive glass doors of the Etna Tower, her camel coat disappearing into the bright, important lobby. She did not look back. He looked down at the coffee stain, a dark, ugly map of his own humiliation. Strangers. She wasn't angry. She wasn't triumphant. She was, he realized with a cold, sinking dread, utterly and completely indifferent. That was his true punishment. It wasn't the loss of the money, or the penthouse, or the status. It was this. It was the absolute, soul-crushing irrelevance. He had defined his entire life by what he'd lost, while she had built a new one that was so large and so bright he no longer even cast a shadow in it. He looked at his own reflection in the window of the coffee shop, a tired, middle-aged man in a cheap, stained suit. He finally, truly understood. He hadn't just made a bad investment. He was the bad investment. A cold Hartford wind whipped around the corner. Mark Harrison turned, pulled his thin coat tighter, and shuffled off to his job. Elena's story isn't about revenge, it's about worth. Mark only saw value in dollars and status, but Arthur saw it in her talent, her heart, and her resilience. The diamond ring wasn't the prize, it was just the mirror reflecting the brilliance that was in her all along. She didn't need to win the breakup, she just needed to win back herself. And in doing so, she gained everything. Mark and Tiffany? They were left with the one thing they truly valued, a cheap, hollow reflection. Thanks for listening to this story. If you were rooting for Elena, please show your support by hitting that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story of karma and comebacks. And share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth. We'll see you in the next one.